Deanna Jackman and Rachel Isser were 6th graders at 2 different middle schools, but they were best friends. The girls lived in Ashland, Oregon, home of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, the kind of small town where people left their doors unlocked and let their children play outside unattended. But after the 27th of December 1979, when Deanna and Rachel went missing, everyone locked their doors. Children all over town had nightmares. And the culture of this quaint, artsy little town changed forever. This week on Out of the Past, the story of Deanna Jackman and Rachel Isser. Ashland was designed for pedestrians. Most places are within walking distance of residential areas. So, even though Rachel and Deanna lived in different parts of town, they were easily able to meet up, which is what they did on the afternoon of the 27th. The girls had plans to play tennis on the courts at Hunter Park. They met on Garfield Street, took a turn on Iowa Street, then walked through the dirt to cut over to the football field at Southern Oregon State College, now Southern Oregon University. The football field in the 70s was uncovered, with wooden bleachers on either side. It hasn't changed much to this day. On the east side of the bleachers sat a wooden press box where members of the media would sit during games. Today, Ashland has a population of only 21,000. Back in the 70s, it was even smaller, about 15,000 people. In addition to being known for the Shakespeare Festival, it has a reputation as a town full of old hippies, and younger hippies often stop in the area on treks up the West Coast. As a result, there are always strangers in town, usually hanging out in vans in parking lots. Yet somehow the town still feels safe. Or at least it used to. Plenty of people saw Rachel and Deanna on their trek to the tennis courts, but nobody actually saw them arrive there. The last place they were spotted was near the football field. When the afternoon turned cold, Rachel's mother began to worry that her daughter didn't have her coat. But when she drove to the tennis courts to bring her the jacket, she wasn't there. Neither was Deanna. Mrs. Isser figured they must be playing somewhere else, so she went home. She felt unsettled for the next few hours. Neither Deanna nor Rachel arrived home for dinner, and both of their families began to worry. The girls' families tried to retrace their steps. They searched everywhere they could think of between their homes and the tennis courts. When they had found nothing by 5 p.m., they asked the Ashland Police Department for assistance. They searched for the girls for hours. After the sun went down, things got tougher. They split up, and Deanna's father Andrew made his way over to the Southern Oregon University football field. There, he stumbled across a can of tennis balls and 2 rackets. After a thorough search of the surrounding area, Mr. Jackman decided to search inside the press box. That's where he burst into tears. Lying sprawled across the floor was the body of a little girl. Her clothing had been removed, and there were strangulation marks on her neck. Jackman recognized the girl immediately. It was his daughter's best friend, Rachel. He looked around and saw clothing items he recognized as belonging to Deanna. He couldn't stop screaming. When the police came to process the scene, Deanna was still missing. Her parents felt the sickening weight of the likelihood that she had suffered a terrible fate, just like her friend. The search for Deanna intensified. Every police officer in the area pitched in, including Oregon State Police and the University Campus Police. A number of citizens volunteered to help with the search as well. Boy and Girl Scouts, the ROTC, and local hikers all pitched in. They kept looking late into Thursday night. They were still searching when the sun came up on Friday. That afternoon, shortly before 4, a helicopter finally spotted Deanna's body past the gravel pits on Dead Indian Road. She too had been undressed, and her body was battered. Police concluded that the injuries were sustained when she was thrown from a moving vehicle. 2 families were devastated. Rachel and Deanna's schoolmates started to have nightmares about what happened. With the killer still on the loose, many local children feared that he would return for more of them. The whole city of Ashland got caught up in the panic. Police were somewhat stumped, but tried to follow every possible lead that came in. When the girls' autopsy reports came back, they learned more about what these poor children had to endure. Rachel Isser died of ligature strangulation. In other words, something was tied tightly enough around her neck for long enough to make her asphyxiate. Deanna's cause of death was also asphyxiation, though her neck didn't bear the same wounds as her friends. It was determined that she had been suffocated. Both girls had been the victims of sexual assault. There were multiple small cuts all over both their bodies, indicating torture. Police who worked on the case described it as the most gruesome case they had ever witnessed. Medical examiner Larry Lumen stated that these murders were the first of their kind in the state of Oregon. Ashland police were anxious to close this case as soon as they could. Tips came in, and they followed every lead. Multiple witnesses who were at the football field at the same time as Deanna and Rachel reported seeing a strange man. 2 children said he asked to play basketball with them, and they declined. The man had been observed by runners passing by, and they claimed the man had just been sitting on the bleachers by himself. One of them was a little startled, as the man seemed to be talking to himself. A vague description of the man was given: a Hispanic male in a green sweater. There wasn't much to go on, but they managed to move forward. All of the witnesses interviewed were asked to work with the police artist to help create a composite sketch. Each description was a little different from the last. Some said he had a mustache, others didn't. Some said his sweater was blue, some green. Still, the descriptions of the witnesses were so close to each other that police deduced that they were all remembering the same man. The police visited schools to talk about what was going on and to drill home the concept of stranger danger. They told the parents not to let their kids go out alone, or after dark. They were also told to report any unfamiliar strangers. That Sunday, the police saved a man from suicide. He had planned to jump from an overpass to the busy Interstate 5. Once they stopped him, the man confessed to the murders of Deanna and Rachel. The cops assumed that this had to be their culprit. The more they investigated, however, the more they realized that his story didn't line up with forensic evidence. It was a huge blow to morale. They thought they had him, but they didn't. The child killer was still at large. The next day, the police published the composite sketches they had produced with their witnesses. The department was flooded with calls. Almost everyone in town thought they had seen this man. Solving this case began to seem like a real possibility. Dead Indian Road, now Dead Indian Memorial Road, is on the outskirts of town. It's not a place many people visit. The killer had to have known that this was a relatively secluded part of town where the body wouldn't be found immediately. This suggested he was a local. Similarly, the press box at the football field was always left unlocked, but only certain people in town knew that. So, though Ashland is a place a lot of people pass through, it appeared that the killer knew his way around like someone who lived there. The next big break in the case came when a paper sack was found at an Ashland car wash. Inside was a quilt covered with dirt and blood. It was turned over to the police, and forensic scientists were able to determine that the blood belonged to Deanna. They immediately photographed the quilt and sent copies of the picture to every local newspaper, hoping someone would recognize it. One man called as soon as he saw the photo, saying the quilt was his. he told police that he'd been allowing a man named Manuel Cortez to live in his apartment on Idaho Street while he was away. The quilt would have been easily available for this man to use. Manuel Cortez worked at a local Mexican restaurant. After talking to his bosses, police decided to move forward with an arrest warrant. It's not clear what they learned that prompted them to do this, but it must have been incriminating. But when the police arrived at the Idaho Street apartment to arrest Cortez, it was clear that he had fled some time ago. They questioned everyone they could find who had interacted with him. No one claimed to know him well. One woman he dated said that he'd only really lived in town for a couple of weeks. He had told her that he was originally from City of Industry, California. Detectives checked with California authorities to see if he was wanted for anything there, and they learned something horrifying. In 1977, a girl from Pomona had been kidnapped and held for ransom. The assailant had attempted to rape her. The man who was wanted in this case was Manuel Cortez. California police discovered that Cortez still had family members living in Southern California and decided to set up a stakeout outside his mother's home. They thought there was a chance he would stop by to visit, and they would finally get their opportunity to place him under arrest. On Saturday, January 5th, Cortez did exactly what police had been waiting for him to do. When he arrived at his mother's home, police officers placed him under arrest. He did not resist or try to run. He went along willingly and even began to confess. They waited until they could tape record him in an interrogation room. Then they let him spill his guts, and it was horrifying. In the hour-long recording, Cortez confessed to raping and murdering 11-year-olds Rachel Isser and Deanna Jackman. Most officers working on the case had never investigated a child murder. Hearing what happened to the little girls was almost too much for some of them. Because this crime was such a sensitive issue for almost every Ashland resident, the trial was moved upstate to Eugene, Oregon, in an effort to get an impartial jury. The trial of Manuel Cortez for the murder of Rachel Isser began in July of 1980. Despite all the evidence the state had, the taped confession, over 30 witnesses, and over 90 pieces of physical evidence, the jury could not come to a unanimous verdict. They were hopelessly deadlocked, and Judge George Woodbridge ended up declaring a mistrial. The state decided that their biggest mistake was only taking him to trial for one crime. When he was retried, the murders of both Rachel and Deanna were consolidated. The jurors would hear about both crimes in the same trial. They also shortened their witness list and decided to help the jury focus by only taking 4 days to present their case. Cortez's defense attorney quit after the first trial. Cortez wanted to plead not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, but his first attorney refused to use this defense. The case was twice as damning in the second trial. The witnesses were carefully selected. District Attorney Frank DeSimone organized everything that happened in the crime into 26 events to help break things down for the jury. His first witness was a local man, Ron Carson, who told the court that he saw Cortez at the football field that day while he was jogging. He said his clothes were wrinkled and that he looked angry and agitated. One witness testified that she had loaned her car to Cortez, who had only used it for about 45 minutes. When he came back, he asked if he could borrow a paper bag. The witness gave him one, and he shoved a wadded-up blanket inside before walking away. It's assumed that he used this car to move Deanna Jackman's body from his apartment to Dead Indian Road. The apartment owner, Peter White, affirmed that it was indeed the blanket from his residence. Witnesses from Cortez's place of work testified that he had come by to ask for his paycheck early. He seemed very out of sorts. They claimed he was normally well-dressed and polite, but that day his clothes were wrinkled and dirty, and he seemed agitated. Criminologist Michael Hurley testified that he had found multiple items with Deanna's blood on them in White's apartment. One jacket had both Deanna's blood and hair on it. Cortez's fingerprints were also found on a knife used to cut Deanna. The prosecution attempted to enter a picture of Deanna's body into evidence, but the defense objected. After some thought, the judge ruled that only a portion could be used, but this portion was still enough to horrify the jury. To put another nail in the coffin, the tape of Cortez's confession was played for the court. Cortez's voice came on quietly. "I killed 2 little girls up there. 2 little girls. This is very sad and hard for me to discuss. It was very terrible. After it really hit me what I had done, I just wanted to die." Cortez explained that there was a gun in the apartment where he was staying, along with a good supply of bullets. "I took one out, I laid it on the bed. I just laid it there. I didn't load it. I sat and looked at it. I sat there and I just looked at that gun, trying to get up and do it. My mind wanted to do it, but my body just wouldn't move." Cortez says that he changed his mind about killing himself and put the gun and bullets away. After this desperate attempt to show remorse, Cortez moved on to explaining what happened with Deanna and Rachel. He had encountered the girls at the college football field. They all sat on the bleachers together and had a long conversation. After the girls became comfortable with Cortez, he suggests that they make their way over to the press box. The girls had been fooled into thinking they could trust Cortez, but when they entered the press box, Cortez restrained the girls and tied them up. When he described the murder and sexual assault of Rachel Isser, he tried to make it clear that Deanna did not witness what happened to her friend. He said that Deanna never saw Rachel's body. That's why Deanna still trusted Cortez enough to walk with him to his apartment, where he murdered her. Cortez never explained where Deanna was while he was killing her friend or why she didn't witness the crime. When asked if he had trouble getting Deanna to go to the apartment with him, he answered, "No, she was just a friendly little girl. She didn't see her friend get hurt." Detectives asked about his motive in the crime. "I don't know. I keep asking that question myself," Cortez told them. The rest of the confession tape contained a lot of rambling and Cortez despairing about his guilt. He cried so hard in the interview that he actually started vomiting. The prosecution's final witness was medical examiner Dr. Larry Luman, who came armed with 12 pictures to show the jury. The court was appalled by the images. "These deaths were sexual, sadistic homicides," Lewin said. "They involved bondage, torture, and sexual abuse. Much of this was clearly done while they were alive." The prosecution rested its case confidently. The defense only called one witness, a psychiatrist, to support Cortez's plea of mental disease or defect. The doctor argued that Cortez was suffering from depersonalization disorder at the time of the crime, and that's why he was so shocked and disgusted with himself when he snapped out of it. In the prosecution's closing statement, they spoke about the mechanics of Rachel's murder. D.A. DeSimone said, "So what we have here is screwing down this ligature around Rachel's neck for 3 to 5 minutes, and that's what he did for his own sexual gratification." On November 25th, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all charges. First-degree murder is a capital crime. Cortez could have faced the death penalty if the Oregon Supreme Court hadn't outlawed the practice. Cortez was given 2 life sentences. Many think that he may have been a serial killer, While in prison, he confessed to the kidnapping in City of Industry. He was convicted of the crime in 1983. If he had other victims, we don't know who they are, and given his history of living a nomadic lifestyle, we don't know where to look. If he did kill others, I hope we can find them and bring peace to their families. This is one of the worst things that has ever happened in my hometown, and doing the research was painful. The community has been shaken by some terrible murders since, but none as shocking as that of these two little girls. A recent case that reminds me a lot of this one is the Delphi murders in Indiana. Abby Williams and Liberty German were killed in February of 2017 by a man lurking in an area where the girls were playing outside. The case is still unsolved. If Rachel and Deanna's story has moved you to action, you may want to consider making a donation to the Cold Case Foundation. They're working hard to solve crimes like these every day. That's all for this week. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. I'll see you next time on Out of the Past.